Story number 1. The fog rolled in low and heavy over the highway, swallowing the world beyond the reach of the truck's headlights. It was the kind of fog that turned distance into a rumor and sound into something soft and uncertain. Out here, in the low country marshland, the night had a way of folding in on itself, and the road seemed less like a route on a map and more like a narrow bridge between waking and something else. The truck's diesel engine murmured steadily, a deep, reassuring vibration that shivered up through the floorboards and into the driver's boots. On the dash, a soft constellation of orange and green lights glowed against the darkness, speedometer needle hovering just below the limit, a gentle sweep of the tachometer, the familiar green curve of the GPS map. Beyond the windshield, there was only fog, pushed apart in a slow-moving tunnel by the twin beams of the headlights. Daniel had driven this stretch of highway a dozen times, but never this late and never in fog like this. He liked the night runs, usually. Fewer cars, fewer distractions, just the hum of the tires and the steady pull of the road. Yet tonight there was a weight in the air that had nothing to do with the freight in the trailer. The air felt thick, like it was listening. The odometer ticked up, mile after mile, but the view barely changed. Pale grass on the median, occasional skeletal trees rising abruptly out of the mist, and every so often the ghostly flash of reflective markers as they slid past. The world outside had been reduced to suggestion. The marsh beyond the guardrail, the dark water and the tangled reeds might as well not have existed at all. Inside the cab, the heater whispered a low sigh of warm air. The faint smell of coffee clung to everything, mixed with worn upholstery and road dust. A small blue air freshener, long exhausted of any real scent, swung lazily from the vent. On the passenger seat lay a thermos, half empty, and a folded map he rarely needed anymore, the creases softened from years of use. The radio was on low, tuned to a distant station barely clinging to the signal. A late-night host murmured about weather fronts moving over the state, a cold system drifting in from the coast. Every few seconds, the voice dipped under a wash of static, then resurfaced, a little thinner each time, like it was traveling from very far away. Daniel let the sound wash over him without really listening, more comforted by the presence of any human voice than by the words themselves. At 2:13 a.m., the GPS display glitched. It wasn't dramatic. The little truck icon simply twitched, sliding a fraction of an inch off the highlighted route and into the pale green space beside it, where the map showed only marsh and water. The road line remained straight. The numbers in the corner, miles to destination, estimated arrival, kept ticking down as if nothing had happened. But for a few seconds, the truck's tiny representation drifted off the highway as though the road had bent without telling him. The icon snapped back to the route with a tiny flicker. The dash light dimmed, brightened, then settled. The engine never faltered. The road ahead remained a pale, glowing ribbon vanishing into the fog. Daniel rolled his shoulders once slowly and told himself it was nothing. Electronics misbehaved in bad weather. Moisture in the air. Static. That was all. Still, he turned the radio up a notch. The station dissolved fully into static. A soft, restless hiss that seemed to ebb and swell like breath. As he reached toward the dial, a voice emerged from the noise, quiet and oddly clear, as if it had been speaking all along and he had only just begun to hear it. "You're running late tonight, aren't you, Redline?" The old CB handle drifted through the speakers, a name he hadn't used in years. The hair on the back of his neck prickled. The words were delivered with lazy familiarity, the way another driver might have spoken over a shared cup of coffee at a truck stop counter. Yet no one knew that handle anymore. Not anyone still out here. The CB radio on the dash was dark. He hadn't flipped it on all night. He told himself the voice came from somewhere else, from some distant call bleeding through. The brain could twist sounds into familiar shapes when it wanted to. He reached out, switched off the main radio entirely, and the cab fell into a deeper quiet. The engine's low rumble suddenly louder, the faint rattle of something in the glove compartment sharply defined. For a while, there was nothing but fog, and the steady forward pull of the truck. Then up ahead, the headlights gathered around a leaning billboard looming out of the mist. Its paint was peeled and faded, the image of a family smiling over pancakes barely visible beneath a lace of weather and time. A diagonal tear cut through the top right corner, like some massive hand had tried to peel the picture away and given up halfway. The wood framing bowed gently inward, as though tired of holding itself upright. He passed it, tires humming, and watched it slip by in the side mirror, swallowed quickly by gray. The odometer rolled another mile. The same billboard appeared again. Same angle, same peeled corner, same wavering lines of text promising best breakfast on Route 19, exit 41. The fog wrapped around its edges like it was trying to reclaim it. The weathered face of the smiling father seemed a little more worn, the blue of his shirt a touch duller, but it was the same sign. It sat where it had no business being, a mile beyond where it should have remained. Daniel's fingers tightened around the wheel. Night driving played tricks on memory. Landmarks blurred together. Maybe there had always been two identical billboards. Maybe he had just never noticed. That was plausible. That was comforting. Another mile. Another quiet, featureless stretch of fog. And then, once more, the same leaning structure emerged, waiting on the shoulder like a tired sentinel. The tear in the top corner. The curling edges of the plywood. The smear of old graffiti on the support pole. Every detail was exactly as before, as though the truck had been looping through the same few hundred yards of highway, returning again and again to the same disintegrating sign for breakfast that no one would ever actually find. He glanced down. The odometer insisted he was moving forward. The GPS showed the truck sliding patiently along the route, approaching the faint icon of a rest area several miles ahead. Outside, the world refused to agree. His breath clouded faintly in the air, a soft ghost of vapor, though the heater was still blowing warm. He didn't notice the temperature at first, not until a shiver drew his attention to the way the air had gone thin and crisp, like autumn inside the cab. A faint scent drifted in, subtle but unmistakable. Damp earth, cold reeds, the green, metallic smell of standing water. It pressed around him, seeping into the fabric of the seat, into the seams of his jacket, as if the marsh had somehow found a way in. The windows were closed. The vents were on recirculate. Up ahead, the fog parted just enough to reveal a figure standing on the shoulder. A woman in a yellow raincoat, the hood drawn up over her head. She held a suitcase at her side, old-fashioned and square, the leather darkened by what might have been rain in another kind of night. Her head was bowed, her face was shadowed. She did not wave. She did not move. She simply stood, inches from the white line as the truck approached. In the close, private universe of truck and fog, she was suddenly the only other human thing. His foot eased off the accelerator, not quite a conscious decision. The truck slowed. The engine's note dropped in pitch. For an instant, it seemed as though time stretched, pulling thin around the moment as it approached and then reached for it. He considered stopping, but there was nowhere safe to pull over with visibility so low. No way to know if another vehicle would come barreling out of the gray behind him. The shoulder was narrow, the marsh creeping close. Taking on a hitchhiker in the middle of the night, alone, miles from anywhere, went against every practical instinct he had honed over the years. The truck glided past the figure. The yellow of the raincoat flashed in the headlights, then drifted by, swallowed at the edges by fog. He caught a glimpse of pale hands at her sides, fingers loose, the suitcase resting just above the ground. No motion, no sign of distress, just stillness, as if she had been waiting so long she had forgotten to signal that she needed help. He checked the side mirror. The shoulder behind him was empty. No yellow, no suitcase, no slow retreating figure shrinking into the distance. The road lay bare and gray, marked only by the soft glow of the truck's own taillights retreating into its own mist. The temperature in the cab dipped again, a subtle but steady slide. Goosebumps rose along his arms beneath his jacket. The marsh smell intensified, carrying with it something older, like leaves that had lain underwater for a long time, breaking down into dark silt. Somewhere deep beneath the sound of the engine, there was a suggestion of something else, faint and insistent, a low, rhythmic lap like water against wood. The CB radio crackled to life on its own. The small screen glowed a soft, dull amber. There was no channel selected, no call sign displayed, just a bar of static drifting up and down. And then, threaded through the noise, a man's voice, low and almost amused, as if the situation were entirely ordinary. "Easy on the mile marker 41 tonight, redline. Fog's a killer in the drowned mile." The words settled into the cab like someone sitting down in the empty passenger seat. Daniel knew that voice. Not well, not intimately, but from a long time ago when the road still felt like an adventure, and he had been new enough to listen eagerly to older drivers' stories over late coffee. It belonged to a man who had favored that stretch of road, who had called it the drowned mile because the marsh came in close, and the fog seemed to like it there more than anywhere else. A man who, according to every story passed in quiet conversations at truck stop counters, had never made it past mile marker 41 on a fog-heavy night much like this one. The rest area icon on the GPS inched closer. Out of the fog, the faint glow of sodium lights appeared, smeared to indistinct halos by the moisture in the air. The promise of a break, a moment off the road, arrived not as a sudden revelation but as a slow, emerging presence. Concrete, parking spaces, a small, squat building with restrooms, vending machines, and maybe, if he was lucky, a humming old coffee machine. He signaled and took the exit. The truck rolled onto the ramp, and the engine's vibration changed, transmitting a different hollow echo through the floorboards, as if the ground beneath had shifted. The fog thinned here, just enough to reveal the outline of a handful of parking spaces, all empty. Yellow light pooled over the asphalt, cold and clear, leaving the edges in a soft blur. The engine idled down to a patient purr as he slid the gear into park and set the brake. The world fell quiet in a way that felt almost profound. No steady hum of motion, no forward pull, just stillness, as complete and encompassing as the fog itself. He stepped down from the cab into air that felt cooler than it had any right to be. The marsh smell was stronger here, as though the rest area had been built not beside the wetlands, but on top of them, the concrete floating on something dark and deep. Gravel crunched softly under his boots. The only sound was the gentle tick of the cooling engine and the distant, windless rattle of what might have been a loose sign, though no breeze stirred the leaves of the lone tree by the building. Inside, the restrooms were clean, the pale tiles humming faintly under fluorescent lights. The vending area beyond was bright but empty. A coffee machine sat in one corner, its digital display glowing too. 27 a.m., a styrofoam cup rested beneath the dispenser, half filled with dark liquid still gently steaming, as if someone had just stepped away and would be returning any moment to claim it. No one came. The radio set into the wall between the vending machines murmured quietly. A weather report played, the same forecast he had heard earlier, but the words were slightly out of step, the timing just a fraction off. Each sentence seemed to echo something he remembered from half an hour before, except the announcer referred to conditions, as of 20 years ago tonight, the phrase slipping through in a monotone, then moving on without remark. On a bulletin board by the door, a cluster of notices fluttered faintly in air that did not seem to move. Lost pets, community events from distant towns, and near the bottom, slightly crooked, a yellowed newspaper clipping, faded ink barely holding on to the paper. The headline mentioned heavy fog on Route 19, a late-night accident near mile marker 41, a long-haul truck, no other vehicles involved. The date was exactly 2 decades past to the day. The photograph beside the text was grainy, indistinct, twisted guardrail, headlights sinking into a smear of white. A rig half visible, its logo blurred beyond recognition. The caption named the driver, a man whose nickname, written in parentheses, was one Daniel dimly remembered hearing on the airwaves when he'd first started driving. The same man whose voice had just told him, gently, to be careful. Outside, the parking lot was no longer empty. Trucks sat in nearly every space, old models and newer ones alike, lined up in silent rows. Company logos that no longer existed. Paint faded, dented, some shining as if they had just rolled off the factory line. No engines ran. No headlights burned. Yet in the quiet between one breath and the next, there was the soft suggestion of presence, as if each cab contained a driver sitting very still, watching. For a heartbeat he thought he could see them. Pale shapes behind windshields, faces turned toward the small lit building, toward the lone figure standing in its doorway. The impression was fleeting, like reflections of clouds moving over glass. When he blinked, there was only the fog, drifting lazily around motionless steel. The CB on his dash crackled again, faintly audible even from where he stood. "Keep it slow past 41, red line," the familiar voice said, softer now, like something remembered rather than heard. "We'll ride with you a while." The rest area's fluorescent lights buzzed. The coffee in the unattended cups slowly cooled. Somewhere in the marsh beyond the guardrail, a night bird called once, a hollow, echoing sound that faded quickly. When he climbed back into the cab and pulled onto the ramp, the heaviness in the air seemed to lift, just a fraction. The fog remained, but it felt less oppressive now, more like weather and less like intention. The GPS icon stayed firmly on the highlighted line. Ahead, the green of the next mile marker emerged through the white. 40. He drove on. At 41, his foot eased down on the brake, almost of its own accord. The truck slowed. Tires whispered over the damp pavement. Through the fog, the faint shadows of old skid marks appeared, dark streaks crossing the lane toward a section of guardrail that gleamed slightly different from the rest, newer metal among the older posts. Someone had tucked a bouquet of plastic flowers into the gap between rails. Their colors were muted but still there, patient against the elements. Something lay in the road ahead, a fallen branch perhaps, or debris blown from the shoulder. At his reduced speed, it was easy to steer around it, easy to keep the truck steady. Had he been going just a little faster, it might have been sudden enough to cause a sharp turn, a slide on damp pavement, a mistake. In the side mirror, for the briefest moment, he saw not only his own tail lights, but a scattering of others, glowing faintly in the fog behind him, spread across the lanes at varying distances, like a convoy packing his progress. Shapes of trucks rode within that glow, indistinct and gentle, keeping their distance, watching. Then the mist shifted, and there was only darkness and the faint red points of his own lights, receding. The marshland fell away gradually. The fog thinned, loosening its hold on the world, letting stars peek through above the dark line of trees. The smell of water and reeds faded from the cab, replaced by the dry, simple scent of old upholstery and coffee. The highway straightened, opened, and the night became just a night again, vast and quiet, the road reaching out ahead with its usual calm indifference. By the time the first pale hint of dawn touched the horizon far behind him, the rest area and the drowned. Mile were only a memory in the mind of one driver, rolling steadily toward his destination. Yet somewhere back there, in the low pockets of marsh and fog, the leaning billboard waited patiently by the road, and the rest area lights hummed over an empty lot that was never entirely unoccupied. Story number 2. The desert had a way of exaggerating distance, turning every mile into a long inhale that never quite exhaled. At night, under a sky so wide it seemed to press down on the world, the highway cut a clean, pale line through endless dark. On most nights, that line stayed sharp and clear from horizon to horizon, a silver thread under the stars. This night was different. Alina watched the first veil of fog slide across the asphalt as if someone had poured milk onto glass. It gathered in low sheets at ground level, clinging to the roadway and the dry scrub beyond. Out on the high plains, Fog wasn't supposed to behave like that. Here, the air was usually so dry it cracked lips and bleached bones. Yet the mist kept thickening, rising slowly from the ditches, curling around mesquite and fence posts until the world beyond the guardrail disappeared entirely. Her truck, 60 feet of steel and cargo, humming steadily under her hands, felt both enormous and fragile in that shifting gray. The dash glowed gently, soft green numerals marking speed and fuel, the faint blue of the GPS map tracing a solitary line through the nothingness. The engine's deep rumble was a comforting constant, a heartbeat she could trust. The radio was tuned low to a late-night station that drifted in and out with the terrain. A song from decades back faded through the speakers, the kind her father used to hum when he drove her along backroads in an old pickup. The melody wove in with the sound of the tires over pavement, the faint rattle of an empty coffee cup in the holder, the whisper of air through vents. The fog climbed higher. It swallowed the fence posts, then the low shrubs, then the reflective markers at the shoulder. The oncoming lane vanished into a blank wall of white, broken only by the faint, ghostly flash of her own headlights bouncing back. Visibility shrank to a tunnel, 20 yards of wet, glowing gray, then nothing. The stars disappeared as if someone had turned off the sky. She eased off the accelerator, letting the speed bleed down to something that felt almost too slow, though it still pulled her onward with steady insistence. Her hands rested firm and light on the wheel. This was what training was for, adapting, staying calm, trusting that the road was still there beneath the tires even when sight faltered. Ahead, a sign emerged from the haze like a revelation. Pale green, reflective, hanging in the fog with no visible supports until the last second. Low visibility area, next 20 miles. Use caution. The letters slid past, dissolving instantly into the mist. The reassurance that someone somewhere knew this stretch of highway misbehaved at night was oddly comforting. She wasn't the first to drive through this. The CB radio on the dash had been quiet all evening. Out here, there often wasn't much chatter. The long-haul drivers ran their own worlds at their own paces. Tonight, though, a soft crackle bled into the silence, then faded. A broken murmur, like a cough in another room. She reached over and nudged the volume up a notch. Static rolled in, a gentle hiss that matched the soft rush of fog against the cab. For several long seconds, there was only that, the kind of white noise that could lull a person into a spell if they let their mind wander. Then a voice slipped through, so matter-of-fact it took a heartbeat to realize it hadn't been there all along. Southbound on 37, you're running into the thick of it. The tone was calm, a little tired, carrying the easy cadence of someone who had been running this route for years. No call sign, no specific greeting. Just a simple observation, directed at no one and everyone. Alina glanced at the CB, then at the GPS. Highway 37, southbound, that was her. She thumbed the mic out of habit, though a part of her hesitated. There was something about the voice, an old-fashioned drawl, a warmth, that pulled up the image of drivers she'd met in her first months on the road, men and women who'd called her kid, and told her which diners made the coffee strong enough to keep you honest. "Copy that," she said, keeping her tone light. Fog came out of nowhere. Static answered, then a soft chuckle. "It likes that stretch, especially near the old rest pull at mile 118. You'll want to keep it under 50 by then." She frowned lightly. She checked the route earlier. According to the GPS, the next marked rest area was at 132. Nothing listed at 118. Probably an old turnout, one that had been closed or skipped in the newer mapping. Still, there was no harm in being cautious. "Appreciate the tip," she replied. "You out here tonight too?" A pause, the kind where breathing almost seemed audible. "Always am." The CB settled back into a gentle hiss. The road pulled her forward. The world shrank to rhythm and repetition. The sweep of the wipers across a windshield gathered with fine mist, the muted thrum of tires over expansion joints, the ticking climb of the odometer. The fog outside pressed against the glass with soft, insistent touch. Every now and then, something would loom at the edge of the headlight beam, a crooked fence post, the silhouette of a twisted tree, only to melt away again as if it had never been. The air in the cab cooled, though the heater's dial hadn't moved. She watched a thin thread of her own breath curl faintly in front of her when she exhaled, barely there, like a whisper turned visible. A trace of scent came with the cold. Not desert dust, not sage or gasoline or dry asphalt, but something damp and fragile, like wet stone and old paper. At mile 116, a shape appeared ahead, low and unlit. For a heartbeat, it was just a darker gray in the gray, a hesitation in the fog. Then the beam of her headlights caught reflective paint, a small sign on a metal post, leaning slightly. Rest area 2 miles. No logo, no state seal. The font was older, the kind she remembered from childhood drives, thin and slightly curved. The metal around the edges was speckled with rust. Her GPS said nothing. The digital map showed only the main line of highway, no exit, no stop. She drove on. At 118, a ramp opened to the right, gentle and unexpected. It wasn't marked by the usual overhead sign, just a break in the guardrail and a strip of asphalt angling down into the fog. The darkness beyond was dotted faintly with what might have been sodium lights, blurred golden smudges in the white. The sensible thing would be to stay on the main road, to trust the map. But her shoulders ached from hours of tension, her eyes burned faintly from staring into the shifting wall of light. A short break, a chance to stretch. To reassess the fog in the miles ahead, it tugged at her with quiet logic. She signaled and eased onto the ramp. The change in sound was immediate. The main lane's low roar faded behind, replaced by a more intimate hush. Gravel whispered under the tires as the pavement transitioned. The truck slowed to a crawl. The fog here felt even denser, if that was possible, drawn in toward the small basin of the rest area like breath into cupped hands. Shapes emerged. The broad rectangle of a restroom building, the outstretched arms of a few bare trees, the long white lines of painted parking slots. A single streetlight burned near the entrance, its glow humming through the mist like something alive. Only one other vehicle sat in the lot. An old cab-over tractor, the kind she didn't see much anymore, paint faded to a weary blue. No trailer. It rested lengthwise along the far side, facing the trees. Its windows were dark. No idling engine, no exhaust plume. Still, it didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused. Alina backed her rig into a slot a few spaces away, the familiar choreography calming her nerves. She set the brake, the soft hiss filling the cab, then silenced the engine. The sudden absence of movement was almost startling. The world narrowed to tiny noises, the creak of cooling metal, the faint buzz of the distant light, the gentle patter of condensed fog dripping from unseen surfaces. Outside the cab, the quiet was vast. The fog wrapped around her legs as she climbed down, cold and fine, dampening her jeans below the knee. The air smelled strongly now of wet concrete and something faintly metallic, like old coins left in rain. Her footsteps on the pavement made muted, hollow sounds, as though the ground had more space beneath it than there should have been. The restroom building's fluorescent lights flickered once as she approached, then steadied. Inside, the tiled floor was spotless but old, the grout lines darkened with time. A paper towel dispenser hummed faintly. In the corner, a vending machine stood half-lit. The top row glowed, the bottom sat in shadow, its contents unreadable. On the wall near the door, a corkboard held a single piece of paper, curled at the corners. It was a notice of closure. State Highway Rest Stop, mile 118. Permanently closed as of July 12, 1998. Please use updated facilities at mile 132. The date stared back at her, the numbers soft with age. A drop of water, condensed from the fog on her hair, slid down and landed on the paper, beating briefly before sinking into the fibers. Closed for decades. Outside, an engine turned over with a low, familiar rumble. She stepped back into the fog, heart tapping a new, careful rhythm. The blue cab-over across the lot now glowed faintly at its edges, its marker lights burning soft amber. The shape of a man sat behind the wheel, framed by the open side window, cap brim low, face mostly shadowed. He raised a hand, a slow, easy wave that matched the tone she'd heard on the CB. "Evenin'," he called, voice carrying in the damp air with unexpected clarity. "Fog's got some teeth tonight." It was the same voice, the same lazy drawl, warmed by an almost grandfatherly amusement, as if odd weather were just another quirk of the road. "Guess it does," she answered, stepping closer but not too close. Up close, the blue paint on the old rig was more gray than anything, the edges softened by a thin film of moisture. The license plate was an old style, letters and numbers worn nearly flat. Thought this place was shut down. The man shifted slightly, a silhouette against a faint glow from his dash. "They put up that sign, did they?" A small chuckle. "Yeah, they like to pretend it's gone, mapmakers too, but it hangs on. Some places don't take to being erased." He nodded at her truck. "You running south past the wash?" "Past 132, she replied automatically. "Then you'll hit the bend where the road used to go straight on. Fog likes to lay down thick right there. You'll see lights where there ain't none. Just keep your wheels on the new line. Don't chase the old one." She studied him, the way the fog seemed to cling a little tighter around his truck, softening its edges. "You run this route a lot." "Every night," he said, with the comfortable certainty of routine. "Someone gotta talk the new ones through. Can't leave you all to the fog." A shiver walked down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "What happened at the wash?" she asked, voice barely above the hush of the mist. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his tone was gentle, like someone telling a story already well worn in their mind. "They straightened the road after the flood, built up a bit, shifted it west. But some folks still see where it used to run. Looks so easy, all that open space. You follow the ghost of asphalt, you end up where the water still remembers." He tapped the side of his own rig with 2 fingers. The sound was oddly muffled. "Just remember, where the reflectors end, you end. Don't go chasing headlights that aren't yours." A low hum touched the air, something between wind and whisper, though no breeze moved the sparse trees. The fog thickened briefly, then thinned again as though breathing. "Gotta get back on the line," he added, voice softer now. "They don't like me sitting too long." "Who does?" she asked before she could stop herself. He smiled then, or at least, the shadow of his face shifted in a way that suggested it. "The one still looking for the old road." When she returned to her own cab, hands a little unsteady on the cold metal handle, the CB crackled alive without her touching it. "Southbound 37, you're clear to roll," the familiar voice said, now filtered through a veil of static. "We'll ride your mirrors a bit." By the time she checked her side mirror, the space where the old cab-over had sat was empty. No truck, no dim marker lights, just a fog-softened rectangle of pavement, bare and still. Back on the highway, the mist closed around her again, but something about it felt less arbitrary now, more like a presence with edges she could recognize. The mile markers slid past, 120, 121, green signs materializing from nowhere and dissolving just as quickly. At 127, the fog thickened abruptly, so dense her headlights bounced back in blinding halos. The road beneath her wheels developed a strange echo, as if another surface lay just below, unseen. Out of the corner of her eye, she thought she saw the faint glow of parallel headlights to her left, deeper in the white, moving at her exact speed. Her heart kicked once hard. To her right, the new road's reflectors blinked steadily in ordered rows, anchoring her in place. To her left, just beyond them, a suggestion of another lane, darker, older, stretching ahead into a deeper gray. Faint red taillights appeared and vanished in that direction, slides of color in the mist, always just beyond reach. She remembered the man's voice. "Don't chase the old one." Hands steady on the wheel, she fixed her gaze on the living markers, the bright, maintained reflectors, the clear center line. She ignored the ghostly impressions just beyond, the sense of trucks packing her in an invisible convoy, the low murmur of engines she could almost hear layered beneath her own. The fog shivered once, then gradually began to lift, unraveling from the road like smoke. The parallel lights faded, the unseen lane melting back into undifferentiated gray, then nothing. When she passed mile 132, the new rest area appeared exactly where the GPS said it would be. Bright, modern, busy with a few scattered vehicles. No fog pooled in its lot. The air above it was clear. She didn't pull in. A few hours later, with the first blush of dawn tinting the horizon and the fog a distant memory behind her, she stopped at a truck stop cafe off the interstate. Over coffee that tasted faintly of burnt beans and metal, she mentioned the old 118 rest area to a gray-haired cashier who'd lived there all her life. "That place," the woman said, pausing with the pot halfway tipped. "They shut that down when I was still young. Flood took out the access road, never rebuilt it. Folks said the fog out there got strange after. You didn't stop there, did you?" Elena thought of the soft glow of the single light, the closed notice on the wall, the blue cab over that had somehow not been there and very much had. "Just past the sign," she answered, and let the conversation drift elsewhere. Back in her truck, as she merged once more onto the highway, the CB gave one last sleepy crackle. "Nice driving, kid," the familiar voice murmured. "See you on the line." Then it was only static again, and the long, patient stretch of road, unrolling beneath a brightening sky. Story number 3. The mountain highway climbed in long, deliberate curves, wrapping itself around the dark bulk of the ridge. Even in daylight it demanded attention. At night, it felt like threading a needle through stone. Malik knew this route well enough to map it in his sleep, each guardrail and runaway truck ramp etched into the quiet part of his mind where the road always lived. Tonight the mountain had changed its face. Fog gathered out of nowhere as he climbed, not drifting down from the peaks like low clouds, but blooming up from the ravines and gullies, pouring over the concrete like breath from some unseen mouth. One moment the night was clear, stars pricking black sky, the truck's headlights casting their usual long wedge of pale yellow. The next, the beam struck a wall of white so dense it might as well have been cloth. The world beyond the hood dropped to a circle of visibility barely longer than the truck itself. Every curve appeared at the last instant, a faint gray suggestion edged in reflective paint. Beyond the guardrail there was nothing at all, just blank, shifting whiteness that hid the drop, the trees, the valley far below. Inside the cab, the heater hummed steadily. The cabin smelled faintly of coffee and the citrus cleaner he favored, undercut now by a thin, sharp scent he couldn't quite place, cold stone and damp metal, the smell of an unfinished basement, unexpected in the clean air of high elevation. The steering wheel vibrated gently under his palms, the diesel engine working down a gear as the climb steepened. On the passenger seat, his thermos rolled slightly as the truck leaned into another curve, its metal clink sounding oddly muffled. The radio, tuned low to a late-night country station, dissolved into static as the mountain blocked the signal. He reached out and switched it off, preferring silence to the hiss. Silence didn't come. The fog made its own sound, a soft, almost imperceptible brushing against the cab, like the whisper of cloth on glass. Every so often, the wind would push a heavier gust across the road, and that whisper would rise in pitch, a brief, breathy sigh that faded the moment his mind focused on it. The CB radio, untouched since the start of the climb, gave a sudden, dry crackle. Malik's gaze flicked to it. The little green channel light glowed steadily. No one had spoken on it for over an hour, The channel had been nothing but occasional background hiss. Now a different kind of static slid through, a thin, high-threaded whisper that set his teeth slightly on edge, as if he'd bitten down on tinfoil. Then very softly, a voice. "Is the tunnel open?" It was a child's voice, small but clear, carrying none of the rough cadence of the usual radio traffic. The words floated into the cab as though the speaker stood right outside the window, careful and polite. Malik's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. He told himself it was some driver's kid playing on the mic, someone idling at a truck stop, letting their child ask questions over the air. It happened sometimes, little pockets of family life slipping into the long steel corridors of the highway. Still, his thumb hovered above the CB switch for a moment without committing. Ahead, the road curved left. A green mile marker flashed through the fog. 74. He counted in his head. The old tunnel section should have been around 77 if memory served, but that tunnel had been gone for years, replaced by a wide cut blasted straight through the rock. The new alignment dipped into a shallow trench, open to the sky, safer than the narrow bore locals still talked about with a certain respect. In the fog, the mountain's outlines had vanished. It could have worn any shape it liked. "Is the tunnel open?" the child's voice asked again, a shade more insistent. The words were followed by a faint sound at the edge of hearing, as though someone else, further from the mic, spoke in a lower tone. The child fell silent mid-breath as though being gently hushed. He pressed the transmit. "Negative, kiddo," Malik said, keeping his tone steady, casual. "Ain't no tunnel up here anymore, just road." Only static answered him, soft as breath. The temperature in the cab slid down by a few degrees. He watched his exhale bloom faintly in the air in front of him, a transparent coil that faded almost as soon as it formed. Outside, the fog brightened briefly, reflecting some unseen light source, then dimmed again. A road sign rose out of the mist, close enough that he could read it only as it passed his door. "Tunnel 1 mile, reduce speed." His chest tightened. The letters were older, narrower than the current highway fonts, the sign's edges rusted, the white background gone the color of weak tea. Moss, or something like it, clung to the posts halfway up. The state transportation department hadn't used that style in decades. He checked his GPS. The screen showed only the sweeping line of the highway bending gently around a contour. No tunnels, no icons. The tiny truck symbol rolled forward untroubled. Fog swirled at the edges of the windshield, thick and liquid, distorting the reflection of the dashboard lights. Another sign appeared, closer still. "Tunnel 14 mile, turn on H80 His headlights were already on, the beams shredded by the murk. The smell in the cab deepened. Wet concrete, old oil, a faint tang of exhaust that didn't belong to his own rig. Somewhere under his tires, the texture of the road changed almost imperceptibly. The muted song of rubber on asphalt picked up a new tone, a hollow resonance, as though the pavement had roof and walls ahead that hadn't yet appeared. The child's voice returned, threaded with a tremor now. "Dad says I have to wait until the cars come out, but they don't, they do." The mic clicked softly, cut off again by that distant, adult murmur. This time, though, the other voice wasn't just suggestion. It seeped through faintly like an old recording played too low. A man's voice, soothing, somewhere between reassurance and weariness. "Just hold tight, bud. Sometimes they get stuck. Fog's bad tonight." Malik's heart thudded once, heavy. The story surfaced in his mind without his permission, dredged from some conversation in a diner years ago. There had been a chain reaction in the original tunnel, late one foggy night. A stalled car, a truck that couldn't stop in time, more vehicles piling in the blind, each following glowing taillights into a wall of confusion. There had been talk of hours before the last horn went silent. And after, talk of the way sound had lingered for days, whenever fog settled in that cut. The tunnel had been closed, dynamited, the mountain opened. Safer now, cleaner, nothing for anyone to get stuck in. Ahead, the fog parted just enough to show blackness. Not the diffuse dark of open night, but a deeper absence, framed by pale stone. The arched mouth of a tunnel loomed, inscribed in the wavering beam of his headlights, its interior swallowing light with greedy softness. Thin tracks of moisture glimmered down its concrete walls. His chest rose and fell measured. The GPS insisted there was no tunnel. The old road, in his memory, curved slightly differently from the new. If he let the truck drift those few feet, followed the suggestion of the black mouth instead of the faint white hash marks flickering at the edge of his low beam, where would his wheels find purchase? The CB crackled again, louder now, the static almost like the rush of air in a confined space. "Are you coming?" the child asked. The echo of his words carried a strange delay as though bouncing off unseen walls. "The cars went in, but they don't come out. Dad says they got turned around." Malik swallowed, mouth dry. The cab felt too small, the darkness too close. Ahead, to the right of the impossible tunnel mouth, a slender line of modern reflectors marked the actual road. Small, bright squares at regular intervals, set low in the concrete barrier. Their white faces winked steadily through the fog, a quiet, mundane assurance. They did not line up with the tunnel. They curved past it, slicing through where memory insisted solid rock once stood. He kept his hands steady and guided the truck along those small white anchors, ignoring the seduction of the black arch. As his front bumper reached the point where his eyes told him stone should have been, where the tunnel swallowed every driver's forward focus, the air changed. Sound thinned. The engine's growl dulled, as if someone had pressed cotton to his ears. The wiper blades moved in slow, exaggerated arcs, each sweep leaving trails of fine droplets that took just a fraction too long to slide. Time itself felt syrupy. And through that strange, compressed silence came other noises, layered and faint, an entire world's worth of sound just out of sight. The distant honk of horns that never quite finished, the grind of gears searching for traction, the overlapping murmur of dozens of voices, each caught in the middle of some unfinished sentence. "Can you? I told you. Just a second." In that half-second of passage, Malik could almost see them, as if reflections had formed on the inside of his skull instead of the windshield. Taillights stacked end to end in a narrow tube of concrete. Faces turned toward an exit that never appeared. A small boy in a backseat craning to look behind him, clutching a toy truck in both hands. Then the truck broke through. Air rushed back into his ears, full and round. The engine's song deepened to its usual tone. The fog ahead was just fog again, thick but ordinary, hugging the open cut where the old tunnel had once stood. The ghost arch vanished as though someone had flipped a switch. In his side mirror, for the briefest moment, the black mouth stood clear, receding, a perfect semicircle carved into the mountain, lined with sodium lamps throwing out dull yellow circles on wet concrete. Dark shapes sat in that glow, motionless. One pair of small, pale eyes seemed to lock with his in the mirror's curve. "Keep going," the man's low voice murmured over the CB, almost inaudible under the fatting static. "He doesn't need to see it again." The child's voice whispered something indistinct, half sob, half sigh. The radio hiss softened, then ebbed back into silence. Mile marker 78 flashed past, green and unremarkable. The road began to descend, the curves widening, the fog slowly thinning like gauze pulled apart. Below, the valley lights spread out in a gentle, glittering fan. By the time Malik rolled into the small truck stop at the foot of the mountain, his hands had stopped trembling. Warm air rushed out when he opened the door to the diner, smelling of coffee, frying eggs, and something sweet baking in an unseen oven. A handful of drivers sat scattered at tables, their jackets draped over chair backs, their tired faces soft in the yellow light. At the counter, two framed black and white photos hung side by side. One showed the old tunnel under construction, raw edges of blasted rock forming a proud arch. The other, its replacement, A wide, clean cut through the mountain, the caption below reading simply, REMMBRANG, those WHO didn't make it out. A woman behind the counter, hair up in a loose gray knot, followed his gaze. "Fog up there tonight?" she asked, topping off his mug without waiting for an answer. "Thick," he said. It was as much as he trusted himself to say. She nodded slowly. "Gets that way some nights. Folks swear they hear traffic where there isn't any, radios picking up things. My brother used to say the mountain remembers." He wrapped his hands around the warm ceramic, letting the heat soak into cold fingers. Outside, through the diner's fog-frosted glass, his truck sat alone at the edge of the lot, headlights off, a solid, ordinary shape in the soft dark. On the drive back through the pass a week later, the night was clear. Stars stretched from one ragged ridge to the other, a river of white. Where the impossible tunnel's black mouth had once gaped, the mountain wore nothing but smooth, pale rock and a small metal plaque set into the barrier, visible only in the sweep of headlights. The CB remained quietly, blessedly still. Only as he reached the far side of the old alignment, just where the air picked up that subtle, hollow note again for a heartbeat, did a sound slip through. A tiny exhale of breath that might have been static, might have been something else. "Dad, look, the trucks are going the right way now." Then the channel cleared, and the mountain road rolled on under the night, carved wide and safe through stone that remembered more than it would ever say aloud. Story number 4. The hills rolled under the highway in slow, measured swells, dark ridges layered against a starless sky. Out here, the trees grew close to the shoulder, their bare branches meshing overhead in winter tangles, and the road wound between them like a narrow, black ribbon. On clear nights, the distant towns along the valley floor cast a faint, comforting glow on the undersides of clouds. Tonight, there was no glow. There were no clouds, only fog. It had started down in the low places, filling the hollows and creek beds, lying flat and quiet like spilled milk. Jo had watched it from her cab as she climbed, the white pools gathering on either side of the road, harmless at first. Then it began to rise, drawn upward as if some invisible tide were pulling it along the slopes. By the time she hit the crest of Ridge 9, the fog had reached the asphalt and spilled across it in a thick, flowing sheet. Her headlights cut only a shallow cone through the whiteness. The rest of the world dissolved into a soft, luminous wall that moved with her, always ahead, always just out of reach. The painted centerline winked in and out of existence, appearing in short, glowing dashes beneath her bumper before sliding away into the dark under the trailer. Inside the cab, the heater blew a steady stream of dry warmth, baking the chill from her knees and hands. The dashboard glowed in a familiar constellation of amber and green, speed hovering at 45, engine temperature steady, fuel just above half. An old hula girl figurine swayed gently on the dash with each curve, its plastic grass skirt whispering faintly in the quiet. The radio had given up its stations 10 miles back. Jo had clicked it off, letting the silence settle around the soft thrum of the engine. There was comfort in that simplicity, the consistent vibration under her boots, the predictable pull and release as she eased through each bend. She chewed the inside of her cheek in a slow rhythm, her jaw tight but practiced. Fog didn't bother her, not really. She'd seen all kinds of weather on this stretch. Still, there was something about this fog. It had weight to it, a presence. The usual faint scent of pine and cold earth that seeped through the vents on mountain nights was gone, replaced by a damp, neutral smell like clean cotton left out in the night air. When she exhaled, she could see the faintest trace of her breath, a thin ghost vanishing inches from her lips despite the heater's efforts. A sign slid out of the murk ahead, so suddenly she almost flinched. Big, rectangular, edged in reflective tape that flared bright white in her headlights. "Fog ahead, use extreme caution." A wry breath slipped out of her. "Bit late on that," she muttered, though no one could hear. The sign vanished behind her in an instant, erased by the white. The road bent left, then right, then straightened into a long, invisible stretch. She knew from memory that this run along the ridge was about 8 miles before the descent. No town exits. No truck stops until she was almost off the mountain. Just forest, rock, the suggestion of open air somewhere beyond the fog's reach. So when she saw the next sign, it took her brain an extra second to process it. Faint at first, a dull, orange glow in the mist, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. Then letters formed out of the light, sharpened by her approach. Fogline Diner, open 24 hours, next right. Neon, not the flat reflectivity of official highway markers. The letters floated in the fog, haloed and soft, attached to nothing she could see until she was nearly on it. Then the post emerged, a thin, dark pole vanishing into the white below, wet with condensation. Joe's shoulders tightened. She ran this ridge at least twice a month. There was no diner on this stretch. There never had been. The GPS, glowing pale on its mount, showed nothing but the twisting line of the highway and the steep drop of contour lines on either side. No cross street. No exit. The fog pressed closer to the windshield, as if it were listening. She told herself it was a prank sign, maybe an old advertisement from years back that someone had left standing as a joke. Yet as she drove on, tension coiled at the base of her neck, a tight braid of curiosity and unease. Coffee sounded good. Food, even better. The thermos beside her was empty but for a cool, bitter film at the bottom. Another glow appeared ahead, lower this time, off to the right. White this time, not orange. The outline of an arrow blinked on and off in the mist, pointing right, its edges jagged but unmistakable. Fogline Diner, exit now. The ramp itself materialized only when her front bumper was nearly past it, a dark slash angling away from the lane, bordered by a low, wet guardrail. It shouldn't have been there. She knew this in the same way she knew the shift pattern without thinking. But her hands moved almost on their own, nudging the wheel, flipping the turn signal. The truck eased onto the ramp, tires humming over the subtle seam between mainline and exit. The grade dipped gently. The fog here grew even thicker, if that was possible, closing in against the sides of the cab like soft, glowing cotton. The sound of the engine deepened, its echo bouncing back from something unseen. Joe took the curve at a crawl, eyes narrowed, until the world opened, just a little. A pool of pale yellow light spread across wet pavement ahead. In its center sat a low, single-story building with a long row of windows and a peaked roof, the kind of simple roadside architecture that could have been built in 1963 and left mostly unchanged. Over the door, a neon sign hummed softly. Fogline Diner, the letters edged in red and blue, a steaming coffee cup flickering lazily in one corner. A handful of cars were parked haphazardly in front, beads of moisture glistening on their windshields. Off to one side, a gravel stretch wide enough for a rig opened like a shallow bay. No other truck sat there. Her headlights swept across emptiness and the faint suggestion of trees beyond. Joe idled the truck into the gravel, straightened, set the brake. The parking lot's sodium lights cast everything in a soft, almost sepia tone. Fog curled in slow eddies around her tires, climbing to her steps. When she opened the door, the cold hit her like a gentle slap, clean and damp. Her boots crunched faintly on unseen grit. The diner's door was heavier than it looked, its metal cool under her fingers. A small bell chimed overhead as she stepped inside, the sound bright and delicate after the muted universe outside. Warmth wrapped around her at once, a soft, encompassing heat that smelled of coffee, grilled onions, and something sweet baking. The interior glowed in lamplight and worn neon, all honeyed wood and red vinyl. A long counter stretched along one side, stools lined up in a neat row, chrome bases reflecting dully. Half the booths were occupied, people bowing over plates, silhouettes framed by condensation-frosted windows. Conversations hummed at a low, comfortable level, punctuated by the clink of cutlery and the occasional soft laugh. A jukebox in the corner played a song she half recognized, something soft and old, guitar and gentle drums, the kind of track that might have drifted from a car radio decades ago. The sound was faint, as though coming from another room behind the wall. A woman in a pale blue uniform appeared at the end of the counter, a notepad in one hand, steam curling up from the mug she held in the other. Her hair was dark and shot through with silver, pinned up messily. Laugh lines framed her eyes. "Evening," she said, as if Joe had been expected. "You look like you've been swimming in that pea soup." "Feels like it," Joe replied, voice a little hoarse. The air in here tasted almost too good, warm, rich, filled with the comforting grease and coffee haze of countless late nights. She slid onto a stool, the vinyl creaking softly under her weight. "How long you folks been here?" "Oh, a while," the woman said, setting the mug down in front of her without asking. The coffee was black, fragrant, steam spiraling up in a perfect column. "Name's May. Kitchen's still awake. Got stew, got pie, got about anything that'll stick to your ribs till morning." "Coffee's a good start," Joe said, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. Her fingers tingled with the sudden contrast. "Didn't know there was a diner on this ridge." May's smile tilted, not quite amused, not quite sad. "We're mostly for the ones who need us. Fog brings folks off the road that might have pushed on otherwise." Joe sipped. The coffee was strong and dark, not fancy, but clean and real. It settled into her like something remembered. Her eyes drifted to the nearest window. The glass was opaque with condensation and fog beyond, milky and impenetrable. She couldn't see her own truck, though she knew it sat just beyond the fringe of the lot. "How bad is it out there?" May asked, wiping a clean cloth along a stretch of counter that didn't need it. "Thick," Joe said. "Feels close, like it's taller than the trees." May nodded slowly, like that confirmed something she had already decided. "You come over the S-curve." "Yeah." "You got the long downgrade ahead of you then. Fog loves that hill, likes to hide things." May's fingers tapped lightly on the counter in an absent pattern. "Dear sometimes, sometimes worse." A flicker of movement drew Joe's attention to the far end of the diner. A bulletin board hung there, cluttered with old flyers and curling photographs. Among them, a yellowed newspaper clipping, its edges browned with time, pinned near the top. "Fog pileup ON Ridge 9, 12 vehicles involved." The headline was bold enough to make out from where she sat. The accompanying photo was grainy, a line of cars and a semi, their silhouettes barely visible in a wall of white. Emergency lights smeared the scene with ghostly red. "Bad night," May said softly, following her gaze. "Long time ago now. They put up all kinds of signs after that, changed some things down the hill. Doesn't stop the fog from trying." Joe let her eyes move across the other photos. Unfamiliar faces smiled back, families at picnic tables, drivers leaning against their rigs, children with milkshakes. The clothes were dated, colors faded, but the joy was fresh in the captured moments. "How far you running?" May asked, bringing her back. "Down to the valley, then east," Joe replied. "Figure a couple more hours once I'm off the mountain." May glanced at the clock over the pass window to the kitchen. The hands pointed to 2:17. The second hand did not move. Joe's own watch, when she checked it, read 2:17 as well. The digital clock on the coffee machine behind the counter blinked the same numbers. "Best get back on the road before the fog decides it's closing time," May said, her tone kind but firm. "Take it slow past mile 211. You'll want to be under 40 by then." "What's at 211? Joe asked. May's gaze flicked, just for a heartbeat, toward the old clipping on the board. "Nothing now if you mind your speed." Another driver laughed softly in a nearby booth, the sound blending with the jukebox's song. A trucker in a cap raised his mug to her in a small, companionable salute without speaking. There was an odd sameness to the people here, a quality in their stillness, in the way their eyes lingered on her for half a second too long and then slid away. Joe drained the rest of her coffee. It should have taken her longer to drink. She had the sudden feeling she'd been sitting there for more time than the level in the cup suggested. When she set it down, May was already there with a clean towel, wiping an invisible ring from the counter. "How much do I owe you?" Joe asked, reaching automatically for her wallet. May shook her head. "You can catch us next time." Her smile was faint, fond. "Just remember 211. The bell over the door chimed lightly as Joe stepped back into the fog. The chill wrapped around her, erasing the diner's warmth as if it had been a dream. For a moment she stood there, disoriented. The building's outline loomed at her back, its neon sign buzzing softly above. The lot was empty of everything but her rig, hulking and familiar in the mist. Climbing into the cab felt like returning to a different world. The interior was exactly as she'd left it. The only change was the new warmth lingering in the air and the faint scent of coffee that wasn't hers. The dash clock glowed too, 19. Her watch agreed. For all that had unfolded inside, only 2 minutes had slipped by. The ramp back to the highway reappeared out of the whiteness when she moved forward, merging her neatly into the right lane of the main road as if the diner had always been there, tucked into the curve. She drove on. The fog surged and ebbed, thickening in places where the woods pressed close, thinning where the land dropped away unseen. Mile markers surfaced out of the glow, green and wet, numbers gleaming briefly before vanishing again. 208, 209, 210. Her foot eased off the accelerator as she watched for the next one, May's voice echoing quietly in the back of her mind. At 211, she was already down to 35. The road dipped into a shallow hollow there, trees reaching in from either side. The fog pooled deeper, swirling in lazy eddies caught by unseen currents. As she entered that pocket, a shadow loomed ahead, then resolved into a living, moving shape. A deer, stepping calmly into the lane from the right shoulder, its coat a soft, ghostly gray in the beams. Another followed, and another, a whole small herd threading across as if drawn by some silent command. Had she been running at her usual 50, she would have needed to stand on the brakes. As it was, the truck slowed easily, their crossing unhurried in front of her bumper. One of the deer lifted its head and looked directly at her, eyes catching the light in a way that made them shine briefly, strangely bright. They vanished into the fog on the left. The road cleared. Her own heartbeat slowed to match the engine's steady rhythm once more. In the mirror, for the briefest instant, a glow flickered low in the mist behind her, off to the right. A smear of warm neon, red and blue, a suggestion of the word FOGLINE curving in the white. Then it was gone, the fog swallowing it like it had never been. When Joe ran the ridge again a week later under a cold, clear starscape, she looked for the exit. The mile where the ramp had been was nothing but unbroken guardrail and trees falling away down the slope, untouched asphalt shouldered by frost. No gravel lot, no sodium lights, no signposts, much less neon. She drove on, the memory of coffee and soft light lingering like heat in her palms, and somewhere behind her the mountain breathed its fog, and the diner waited patiently for whoever needed to see it next. Story number 5. The coastal highway unfurled along the edge of the continent, a thin ribbon of asphalt clinging to cliffs and skirting inlets where black water pushed in from a colder, darker ocean. In daylight, the view could steal breath, steep rock dropping to surf, seagulls wheeling, white lines of foam drawing delicate handwriting on the sand far below. At night, the water might as well have been sky. Only the sound of waves far beneath hinted that there was anything out there at all. Tonight, even that sound was muted. Ray's rig rolled north with a low, steady hum, its trailer stacked with palletized lumber that ticked and shifted their soft, familiar complaints with every curve. He had driven this stretch since before the new bridge was finished, long enough to remember when it was a skinny, steel thing that looked more like scaffolding than infrastructure. The Narrows crossing had always been the part of the route that made his hands just a little tighter on the wheel. The fog had come in fast, thicker than he'd seen in years. It didn't blow in like smoke from the sea. It grew, rising from the water in pale sheets, curling up the rocky walls, stepping over the guardrail as though the barrier meant nothing. His headlights pushed into it, but only barely. The world beyond the hood was a bright, shifting wall of white, absorbing edges and distance, leaving him with 20 yards of road and the quiet suggestion of lines. Inside the cab, the heater thrummed gentle warmth around his knees. The smell of salt lived permanently in the upholstery, layered with old coffee and the faint, sap-sweet trace of lumber. The dash cast a soft, green glow, analog gauges and digital readouts mingling peacefully, like eras sharing a table. The radio had lost its music stations 30 miles back, the coastal rock eating the signal. He had turned it down to a murmur of static. Now he reached for the CB instead, flicking the switch with practiced ease. The little orange channel light winked awake. "Breaker 19, he said, voice low and companionable, the way you spoke when you weren't really expecting anyone to answer. "Northbound on the 7, 2 miles south of Narrows. How's it look up ahead?" For a few breaths, there was only the soft hiss of background noise, that random scatter of sound that lived in the spaces between words. The fog swirled outside, pressing closer to the glass, turning his own reflection into a pale, ghostly echo of his face. Then the static thickened, drawing together like a sheet pulled tight. A voice pushed through, thin at first, then clear. "Northbound, say your location again." The accent was familiar coastal, words rounded just so, consonants softened by years of rain and tide. The tone was steady, but there was an undercurrent in it, caution maybe, or tiredness. 2 miles shy of Narrows, Ray answered, glancing at his odometer to confirm what he already knew. "Just past marker 61. Fog soup out here." A pause. Somewhere in the distance, a foghorn moaned once, low and mournful, its sound dulled by the mist. "Copy that," the voice said. "You see the bridge deck yet? We're not getting any lights from this side." Ray frowned. "Not yet, still on the approach. What's your mile?" 64, just off the span," the man replied. "Southbound lane, been sitting here since the hit. Can't see 2 trucks ahead. You got any word from Dot?" "Hit." The word slipped out of Ray's mouth before he could smooth it into something more neutral. A soft burst of static, like a sigh. "Barge lost power in the channel," the other driver said. "Tug couldn't hold her. Took the center pilings hard. We heard the metal go from here. Nobody wants to roll until we know what's left underneath us." Ray's hands tightened on the wheel. The Narrows crossing had been hit once, years before the new concrete causeway replaced the old steel. The story had circulated in late-night conversations at truck stop counters, each telling smoothing some edges and sharpening others. Fog, a tug, a loaded barge, a hollow boom felt in the bones, a section of deck that simply wasn't there anymore when the mist thinned, headlights where there should have been air. That was long ago. Long enough that the new bridge, wider, heavier, built of reinforced concrete and redundant supports, had already taken on the unremarkable weight of always been here for newer drivers. He reached for the GPS without taking his eyes from the road. The small screen glowed calmly, the highway line traced in pale blue, his truck icon advancing toward a representation of the Narrows crossing that looked as solid and unremarkable as any other stretch. No warnings, no closures. Traffic data, sparse at this hour, showed a few vehicles ahead, moving slowly but moving. "What's your 20 northbound?" the voice asked again, a shade tighter. "Still coming in." Ray considered a dozen explanations. Somebody stuck on an older parallel route, some off-channel frequency bounce, a bored driver somewhere playing with old stories. But the fog outside made every idea feel thin. "Mile 62, he said. Honesty felt like the only real thing in the cab just then. "I'm on the new deck, friend. They replaced that span years back. You might be on a different timetable than me." Static flooded the channel, tense and crackling. For a moment, he thought the connection had snapped. Then the man laughed, a short, disbelieving sound that dredged up images of coffee-stained mugs and maps spread on diner tables. "Wish that were true," the other said. "We've been watching for those new lights all night. All we got is fog and the old rigs ahead of us. You sure you're not playing with me northbound?" A green sign loomed out of the white, a big one, hanging over the lanes on a metal gantry that appeared only as his hood passed under it. "Narrows crossing, reduce speed, use caution." The letters gleamed wetly, beads of moisture catching his high beams. The gantry overhead was the new kind, heavy and squared, not the spidery lattice of the old steel days. But for the briefest second as he slid past, the structure shimmered. In the exact center of his windshield, the smooth box beam supports became a tangle of riveted girders, the shadow of a truss arching over darkness. Then the fog folded in and it was gone. He answered on instinct. "I'm as straight with you as the center line," he said, voice softer. "What year you callin' from, driver?" The question hung there, absurd and impossible, and somehow the only one that made sense. Another pause. The CB crackled just once like a vinyl record finding its groove. "89, the man said, as simply as if he were statting the time. "January. Storm rolled in faster than they said. What year you sittin' in?" Ray swallowed against a dry throat. 2025, he said. "December. Calm sea far as I know. Bridge is whole on my end." The other driver exhaled, and the sound slid through the CB like wind down a long corridor. "Well now," the voice murmured, "ain't that something?" The approach ramp leveled, and the world beyond the hood fell away. There was only fog and the faint suggestion of space. The truck's headlights struck the low concrete barrier on either side, painting pale, damp surfaces that curved gently out of sight. The center line and edge reflectors glowed steady, modern and bright, embedded at regular intervals. And yet, beneath that another. Impression pressed at his senses. In the corner of his eye, the barrier was not solid concrete but open steel, vertical posts leaving glimpses of nothingness between. Overhead, where no structure should exist, something loomed, thinner, nervous, a tangle of dark lines against lighter mist. Sound changed as his front tires rolled firmly onto the span. The engine's growl developed an echo, a hollow resonance that climbed up through the floorboards. Somewhere down and to the left came the slow, measured slap of water against pilings. Under that, subtler still, a faint, a rhythmic clank like a huge chain rubbing along metal in the dark. "Northbound," the man on the CB said quietly, all earlier humor gone. "I'm seeing something ahead. Can't tell if it's headlights or nothing at all. We got a brake check stack a mile long out here. You got clean run, you just remember you're alive and keep it that way, you hear." The words weren't command or warning exactly. They were a benediction. "Copy," Ray answered. "What's your handle?" "Foghorn," the man said, almost laughing at the appropriateness. "They stuck me with that years ago, I guess it fits." "Ray," he said, though nobody out here used his actual name on the air. "I'll carry you with me, Foghorn." The CB coasted back into soft hiss. Fog thickened around him, swirling in heavy banks that seemed to have their own direction, their own purpose. The reflectors on the barrier's top rail grew dimmer, their light eating itself in the moist air. His speed dropped on its own, foot easing off the pedal until the truck crawled forward at barely 30. Halfway across, the world shifted. For an instant, his own headlights no longer reached the pavement directly ahead. Instead, they flared off mist and something beyond. A jagged line where the deck should have been. A gap shrouded in swirling white. The faint vertical hint of broken rebar hanging down into emptiness. The logical part of his brain shouted that the road was there. He could feel it through the steering wheel, through the subtle feedback of the tires. The GPS still showed his truck as a small arrow bravely marching across a pale blue line drawn clean from one shore to the other. But his eyes saw an opening. Just beyond that imagined absence, faint red points hung in the mist, taillights, stacked and unmoving, A row of vehicles backed up to the edge of nothing. Silhouettes of trucks loomed behind them, cab-over noses and boxy trailers from another era. Vapors curled from unseen exhausts, frozen in place as if time itself had thickened around them. He kept his gaze fixed not on the phantom gap, nor on the ghostly convoy, but on the living details right in front of him. The reflective studs inset in the center of his lane, the wet shine of modern concrete beneath his beams, the rhythmic thump of expansion joints spaced exactly as they had been every other clear, ordinary night. The truck rolled on. As his cab passed the place where the old span had once failed, a sound rose from below, so soft he might have imagined it. A deep, muffled boom, less heard than felt, followed by the slow, drawn-out screech of metal protesting weight it was never meant to bear. Then another noise layered over it, smoother human, a chorus of overlapping voices, all speaking at once and not finishing. "Back it down. I can't see. Where's the rail? Is that?" The words tangled, blurred. No single phrase finished. They coiled together into something almost like a single long breath poured out in parallel. And then threaded through that, very clear and very small, a child's voice. "Dad, it's just fog. They're still there, see." Ray's grip shifted on the wheel, one knuckle whitening. The next expansion joint thudded under his tires. The next and the next. With each, the phantom gap seemed to close a little, the impression of broken bridge and dangling metal giving way to the mundane geometry of the new structure. The overhead sensation of steel softened, retreating, replaced by nothing but open air. The CB clicked once, all on its own. "Northbound," Foghorn's voice said, so faint the words almost broke apart in the static. "You're hearing us, aren't you?" "I hear you," Ray said. The line went very quiet. He could feel, irrationally but convincingly, that he was being watched, not in the threatening, crawling skin way of some horror, but in the attentive posture of those on the sidelines of a race, waiting to see if the runner makes the jump. His front tires reached the imaginary far edge. His back tires followed. The echo under the truck softened, the concrete's tone shifting as the bridge gave way again to solid ground. The barrier straightened into a simple wall. The fog horns outside dropped to a distant, bass mutter rather than a close moan. On the far shore, the mist thinned almost like someone dimming a light. Visibility stretched in clean increments, 20 yards, then 50, then 100. The wet black line of the highway redefined itself, flanked by scrub and low guardrail. The ocean's smell remained, but here it carried the familiar aromas of tar and kelp, not the strange, metallic tang of somewhere in between. In his side mirror, as the last of the fog peeled away from the trailer's doors, he saw it. Just for a heartbeat, framed in the rectangular glass, the old bridge stood behind him, narrow, latticed, a delicate spiderwork of girders half vanished into vapor. In its center, a darker band hung where the deck had sheared away long ago. On the near side of that gap, a line of stopped vehicles sat in patient line, their outlines softened by distance and weather. One truck's cab, painted a pale, indeterminate color, had its window down. A man leaned out, one arm resting on the frame. Though the distance should have made it impossible, Ray knew the exact tilt of that man's head. He knew there would be a coffee mug on the dash, half finished, and a frayed picture taped to the visor, corners curled. The man raised his hand, just slightly, in something that was almost a wave and almost a blessing. Ray blinked. The image shattered. In the mirror there was only the broad-shouldered bulk of the new causeway, lights marching in a tireless line across nothingness, and a thick bank of fog rolling slowly back to sea. He drove until the highway bent inland and the smell of pine replaced the tang of salt. At a small all-night truck stop tucked into the trees, he parked and let the engine tick itself to quiet. The cafe's interior was bright and ordinary, walls paneled in fake wood, Christmas mugs stacked by a coffee urn, even though the holiday had already passed. There was a bulletin board by the cashier, cluttered with business cards and for sale notices. Near the corner, yellowed but still legible, a newspaper clipping was pinned beneath a plastic thumbtack. Barge strikes narrows bridge, one section collapses. The photo was grainy, shot from a distant bluff. It showed the gap where steel should have been, a barge angled perilously against the ruined pilings. The headline mentioned minor injuries, incredible luck. Buried in smaller print further down, almost an afterthought, a line about one truck still unaccounted for. Beside the article, a black and white snapshot was pinned with its own thumbtack. A driver in a flannel shirt leaning against a cab-over rig, the ocean faintly visible behind him. Someone had scrawled foghorn in pen along the bottom margin. When Ray made the crossing in clear weather, the bridge was just a bridge. Concrete, railings, views of gray waves and whitecaps. The foghorns moaned at distant intervals, and the CB stayed as quiet as he left it. On nights when the fog rose from the water and swallowed the shore, though, he kept the radio on and his speed a few miles under what felt natural. Sometimes, in the deepest part of the crossing, the static would thicken, and a voice would slide softly through, talking to someone just ahead or just behind in a year that no longer existed. He learned to listen without answering, to carry the sound with him like an extra heartbeat, until he was safely on the other side. The Narrows had its own memory, stored in steel and water and the spaces between. Out there, when the fog was at its highest and the bridge's echo was just right, the road belonged to more than one night at a time, and a man could catch, for the span of a single crossing, the sound of another trucker waiting politely in a line that would never move. Story number 6. The interstate ran straight as a ruled line across the plains, a dark seam between fields that had surrendered their crops weeks ago. Stubble lay in low, orderly rows on either side, glinting faintly when the truck's headlights brushed them. Out here, the land didn't so much rise and fall as breathe slowly, a shallow swell, then flat again, stretching to a horizon that the night had wiped clean. Ash had been running west for hours. The reefer unit behind him hummed with its steady, mechanical heartbeat, keeping a trailer full of produce at the exact temperature a grocery, warehouse 3 states away required. The sound blended with the diesel's low growl, the hiss of wind around the mirrors, the small orchestra of rattles and creaks that made up the cab's familiar song. The fog began as a low ground haze in the ditches. At first it was barely there, a faint whiteness clinging to the grass along the median, a thin, luminous smear in the corners of his vision. He kept one eye on it as he drove, more out of habit than concern. Night air met day-warmed earth, and this was what occasionally happened, wraiths of mist rising peacefully from the soil. But tonight, instead of burning off, the haze thickened. It climbed the slopes of the drainage ditches bit by bit, translucent hands reaching upward. The headlights picked it up in broken pieces at first, beams snagging on threads and lumps of brightness before letting go again into ordinary dark. Then the threads joined. The world beyond the hood shrank in increments. First a half-mile of shallow sight down the interstate's gentle arrow, then a quarter, then 100 yards. The sky vanished behind a lid of soft, pale gray. The far poolsing beacons of cell towers along the horizon went out one by one as the fog rose, as though someone were dimming the world. Ash eased off the throttle, letting the truck settle into a slower, more cautious rhythm. His dashboard glowed in response, speedometer needle dropping to a modest 52, cruise control disengaged. The GPS map remained serene, a blue line unrolling straight across a flat, greenish background. No curves, no intersections, no weather warnings. Nothing to explain the sudden, insistent closing in of the night. He turned the radio down until it was only a suggestion under the engine. The late-night talk host's voice faded into a murmur, replaced by the intimate sounds of the cab. A thermos rolling slightly in its holder, the squeak of his seat as he shifted, the faint rustle of a map in the door pocket breathing with the truck's motion. A sign emerged from the fog ahead. floating at first as a pale rectangle with no context, until the metal posts resolved beneath it. Way Station 2, miles, all trucks must stop. Ash's brow furrowed slightly. There hadn't been a working way station on this stretch for years. The company route notes marked it as decommissioned, no stop required. The app he used to track facilities didn't even list it. The sign slid by, damp and serious. He told himself it was a leftover, one of those relics the highway department hadn't gotten around to taking down. They could linger for years, half forgot, quietly instructing nobody to do things nobody needed to do anymore. Still, when the fog swallowed the sign again, the cab felt a fraction smaller. Another mile. The mist thickened, pushing closer in a way that felt deliberate. The white paint on the lane lines bloomed bright in the high beams, then dissolved at the edges like sugar in hot water. The darkness above and beside the truck was gone. There was only fog. The next sign came sooner than felt right, as though the distance between them had shrunk. Way Station 1-2 mile, prepare to stop. Its reflectorized surface gleamed wetly, beads of moisture catching the light. This sign wasn't rusted or tilting. Lettering crisp, edges clean, newer. Ash's hand hovered towards the CB mic on reflex, then thought better of it. The channel had been quiet all night. Out here at this hour, most of the drivers he might reach were running their own silent bubble through the dark, content with the company of their engines. The third sign left no ambiguity. Way Station open. Bright yellow lights framed the word, flashing in an alternating pattern that made the fog around it pulse. He glanced at the GPS. The electronic map showed nothing but the straight line of the interstate marching forward. No exit, no facility mark. The tiny icon of his truck slid steadily along, unbothered. Ahead to the right, a faint smear of light smeared through the fog. At first it might have been just another halo around a road lamp out in the fields. Then it sharpened into two neat rows, fluorescent tubes humming under a canopy, splashing pale rectangles of illumination over a lane that curved gently off the main road. His foot drifted to the brake almost of its own accord. A lifetime of training overriding the quiet voice in his head, cataloging all the reasons this didn't make sense. The ramp unfolded beneath his wheels, its surface subtly rougher than the glass-smooth interstate, as though it hadn't seen as much resurfacing. The truck slowed, engine downshifting with a series of calm, controlled sighs. Fog wrapped the rig on all sides now, mooting the outside world into a soft, echoless hush. The way station appeared out of that hush, like a memory surfacing. A long, low building of cinder block and glass. Large bay windows facing the approach lane, their interiors glowing with institutional yellow light. Overhead, a canopy stretched across a single scale lane, fluorescents buzzing quietly, throwing cold illumination down onto the wet concrete pad and the metal plate of the scale itself. The place looked old but not abandoned, broom clean. The painted lines guiding trucks across the scale were bright, unmarred by gravel or weeds. An open sign glowed red in a side window. Ash rolled forward onto the pad as the overhead light ticked from red to green, then back to red again, as if acknowledging his presence. He brought the truck to a smooth stop with his front tires squarely on the markers. He waited for the familiar hollow feeling of being weighed, tiny, almost imperceptible shifts as the scale measured and thought. Instead, what he felt was stillness. The rig settled as though it had exhaled and decided not to breathe in again for a while. The station window slid open with a faint, metallic scrape. A man leaned out, bracing one hand casually on the sill. He wore a uniform shirt in a shade of blue that had gone out of style a decade or two ago, its patches slightly faded at the edges. A metal badge caught the light on his chest, the state seal etched in fine detail. His hair was gray at the temples, cut short. His face was unremarkable in the way that some people get when they've looked at thousands of others doing the same thing for a very long time. "Even in," he called, the single word carrying easily through the damp air. "Go ahead and set your brake, driver. Stretch your legs if you want." His voice had a tired warmth to it, the tone of someone who'd been on this shift long enough to accept whatever rolled onto the pad. Ash flicked the parking brake. The little hiss sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet. He hesitated a moment. Every instinct told him to stay in the cab in fog like this, then decided nothing terrible had ever come from walking 15 feet onto a lit concrete pad under someone's nose. The cold, wet air outside the cab felt thicker than expected, as if he were stepping into a room instead of open air. The fluorescents hummed overhead, a sound that vibrated faintly against his eardrums. The smell here was different, less of damp field, more of metal and old paper and something faintly chemical, like long-dried machine oil. The man at the window watched him approach with steady, pale eyes. "Got you on the pad," he said, glancing down at something out of sight, a console, Ash assumed, or a computer monitor. "You're running reefer, coming from the big distribution center east." "Yeah," Ash replied. "Westbound 95,000 gross." The older man's mouth twitched faintly. "Truck knows its own weight, does it?" Ash gestured back at his trailer. "Close enough. I scaled at Portview. Got the ticket if you need it." The man's gaze moved past him to the outline of the truck in the fog. The rig loomed dim and monolithic, its own details softened away. Sometimes things pick up weight along the way. Night air's strange that way. Ash smiled, unsure whether it was a joke. Should still be legal. "Oh, you're legal," the inspector said, eyes flicking down again, following numbers across a screen, or perhaps a dial. From this angle, Ash couldn't quite see. "You're just heavy on the back end, more than your paperwork says." Ash felt a faint thread of unease. He shifted, hands tucking into his jacket pockets for warmth. The fog clung cool and fine to his eyebrows, his lashes, beating in tiny droplets that made the station lights halo out. "Wasn't much room to move the axles," he said, "more to fill the silence than anything else." The man nodded slowly. "You're not the only weight back there, that's all." Ash followed his gaze toward the trailer again. The fog around it seemed denser somehow, pressing in along its ribs like hands. The humming of the reefer unit had taken on a different note now that he was listening, a faint undertone, like another rhythm beating under its work. A shiver traced his spine, though the air was no colder than before. "You'll want to ease it down at mile 303, the inspector said, his eyes finding Ash, again with a sudden, pinning sharpness. "Fog likes to lie in the dip. Folks forget how long it takes 95,000 pounds to notice the brakes." "I was planning on." "Slower than you think," the man interrupted gently. "Give the ones ahead of you room to breathe, even if you can't see them." Ash nodded, then blinked. "There's traffic up there. Thought I'd had the road mostly to myself." The inspector's gaze slid sideways, toward some point beyond the scale lane, into the fog thick as plaster just outside the station's island of light. "They're there," he said softly. "Sometimes they're a little out of step. You keep your space, they'll keep theirs." Silence settled between them like another, softer fog. Behind the window, the station's interior was dim and somehow timeless. A corkboard hung on the wall, covered with slips of paper that had aged to yellow or brown at the edges. An analog clock ticked above it, its hands at 10 past 2. A peeling calendar showed a month and year Ash knew were wrong, though his eyes didn't quite focus on the numbers. "How long you been out here?" Ash asked, partly to break the strange, thick quiet. The man's smile was small and wry. "Long enough to know when the nights carry in extra, long enough to wave through what needs waving through." He slid what looked like a clipboard closer, then away again as though he'd signed something invisible. "You're good to go. Scale says you check out. Just keep your weight where it belongs, all right." "I try," Ash said, not entirely sure what he was promising. The inspector's gaze softened. "Most of you do." Back in the cab, the familiar smells and textures wrapped around him with a surprising rush of relief. He closed the door, shutting out the humming fluorescence, the close fog. For a moment he sat without moving, feeling the truck's stillness like a held breath. The dashboard clock read 2:10 a.m. He glanced at his phone. 2:10 there too. The GPS, quietly glowing, showed his icon paused in a strange, off-road limbo beside the interstate. No way station was marked. No exit. Just a small deviation, as if the truck had drifted into the grass. His coffee in the cup holder was still warm, as if he'd taken a sip only a minute ago. He shook himself, eased the brake off, and rolled forward. The scale lane merged cleanly back into the interstate, the merge point smoothed and seamless. The truck's tires found the long, straight rhythm of the main line again. Behind him, in the mirror, the way station's lights glowed in a soft rectangle in the fog, slowly shrinking, then smearing, then disappearing altogether into the white. The fog beyond mile 300 grew heavier, not lighter. It gathered in the depression the inspector had mentioned, a low sag in the land where fields dipped and a small creek ran under a concrete culvert. Visibility shrank again to a narrow, glowing tunnel. The reflectors on the road's edges appeared and disappeared like blinking eyes. His speed slid down to 40, then 35, his foot feathering the brake without conscious thought. A darker shape materialized in the beam ahead, then became many smaller shapes as he crept closer. A scatter of something across both lanes, broken pallets, maybe, or a jumble of farm equipment fallen from an unsecured trailer. Wooden slats, a wheel, a thin metal bar lying diagonally where the tires should go. At highway speed, hitting that debris would have meant an ugly jolt at best. Ash eased the truck around the mess, grateful for the open left lane, for the space to move. As he passed, his headlights picked out deep grooves in the shoulder, the kind that came from something very heavy sliding sideways, carving its panic into gravel. The fog smeared the details, but they were there, dark and parallel, ending abruptly at the edge of the culvert's guardrail. On the other side, where the earth dropped a few feet to the shallow creek, the mist lay so thick it looked solid. Whatever story the grooves had been writing disappeared under that white, unwritten. In his mirror, the shape of the tangled debris blurred quickly as the fog reclaimed it. For a moment, though, he thought he saw more than just his own taillights in the reflection. A suggestion of other red glows, staggered at uneven distances behind him, like a series of trucks running with unusually wide following distances, keeping space between them and something unseen. The feeling of being accompanied came to him again, not crowded, not threatened, just paralleled. The miles unrolled. The fog began slowly to thin. The sky above his windshield reappeared as a smeared, dark dome. A few hesitant stars pricked through. On the horizon ahead, a faint orange glow announced the outer edge of a sleeping town. When he pulled into the truck stop at the next exit, the world felt normal again. The harsh white glare of parking lot lights, the smell of diesel and fryer oil, the murmur of other drivers moving about their own small errands. He killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening to the sudden, deep quiet inside the cab. At the fuel desk, waiting for his receipt, he mentioned the way station casually, half to see if the words sounded as odd out loud as they did in his head. "Southbound side, you mean?" the clerk asked, frowning slightly. "North," Ash said. "About mile 298, lights on, guy in a blue shirt working the scale." A driver at the next register, older, hair going silver under his cap, turned his head at that. "Ain't nothing open out there anymore," he said. "Used to be a station, back before my time running this lane regular. They shut it down after that tanker deal." "What?" The clerk nodded. "Yeah, chemical outfit overloaded a trailer. Guy at the station tried to wave IM off, but he kept on. Rolled it over in the dip at 303 when he couldn't get it stopped." She shook her head. "My dad still talks about it, foggy night. Said he could smell that spill from 10 miles off." The older driver shifted his weight, studying Ash. "You sure you didn't just pull into a scale house on the wrong highway, kid?" Ash thought of the inspector's patched uniform, the analog clock, the calendar with dates he hadn't quite managed to read, the way the reefer's hum had taken on that double thrum on the pad. "I'm sure," he said quietly. The other man's gaze lingered a moment, then he nodded, almost to himself. "Well, guess they're still watching then." He tipped his chin with a kind of rough respect. "You mind them when they talk. Those old hands spent a lot of years trying to keep folks from digging their own holes in the dark." Back in his truck, Ash scrolled through his log, half expecting to find some anomaly. The ELD showed a neat, unbroken block of drive time across the last hour. No stop recorded. No location ping off the interstate. On the passenger seat, where his spare notepad usually rode, a single sheet of paper had been torn from the top. Someone had written a number on it in neat, blocky script. 94,980. His exact legal gross, and just below lightly in the same hand. "Watch your weight after dark." He looked up sharply. The cab was empty. Outside, the parking lot lights haloed in the thin, ordinary mist of early morning, a far cry from the dense, insistent fog of the plains. He folded the paper once, then again, and slid it into the flap of his logbook, where drivers used to tuck scale tickets before the screens took over. It rode there, a small, firm weight, as he eased back onto the interstate and into the remaining miles of the night. Somewhere behind him, beneath a sky the fog had reclaimed, an old cinder-block way station sat on its concrete island beside a straight, empty stretch of highway. Its fluorescence hummed patiently. Its analog clock ticked perpetually around a particular, quiet hour. And when the fog grew thick enough, and the night felt like it was carrying more than usual, its open sign glowed softly red, and a man in a faded blue shirt leaned on his window, watching for headlights that might need to be reminded just how much they were really carrying. Story number 7. The two-lane connector road slipped away from the interstate and into the dark like a side thought. It was the last leg of the run, 40-odd miles through farm country and low river hills, to a warehouse tucked outside a small town that barely showed up on most maps. By daylight, the route was gentle, fields on either side, an occasional farmhouse, the road rising and dipping in slow, unhurried waves. Tonight the fields were gone. The world beyond the glass had dissolved into fog. Mara's truck moved through it at a careful 40, its headlights carving a shallow, glowing tunnel in the white. The beams reached only a little way ahead before the mist turned them back on themselves, making the road seem shorter than it was. The rest of the universe had shrunk to the ribbon of asphalt immediately in front of the bumper, and the pale curve of the center line sliding away under the hood. Inside the cab, the engine's low rumble and the steady hiss of the tires on damp pavement held her in a familiar cradle of sound. The heater pushed warm air at her legs. The faint scent of stale coffee hung in the fabric, along with traces of diesel, dust, and a lemon cleaner she'd used that afternoon at the truck wash. A small stuffed wolf dangled from the CB microphone clip, rocking gently with each subtle sway. The radio had lost its station a few minutes after she left the interstate. Static now filled the speakers in a thin, restless whisper. She turned the volume down until it was almost a feeling more than a sound. On the GPS screen, the blue line of the road was unbothered, marching straight ahead through a pale green nothing. No towns were marked between the interstate and her destination. No side roads of note, just the connector. The fog pressed closer, thickening in layers. It had a texture, almost grainy at the edges of the light, like the surface of unpolished glass. No stars, no moon, no sky, just the colorless, luminous dark. Out of that dark, a soft orange glow appeared to her right. It floated at first, a smudge of color hovering in the mist, then sharpened into a rectangle made of neon tubes. Letters resolved slowly, as if they had to push through the fog one by one. Fenway's Fuel and Food. A cracking red arrow beneath the words pointed right, toward a patch of deeper shadow. As her headlights slid closer, they painted the shape of an old-fashioned gas station. A narrow building with a low, shingled roof and a glass-fronted storefront. A pair of vintage pumps under a metal canopy, the sign above humming faintly. Yellow light spilled from the windows onto wet concrete. The fog swirled around the building's edges as though it were an obstacle in a slow-moving current. Mara's fingers tightened around the wheel. She had studied this route before leaving the yard. There were no fuel stops on this stretch, nothing but land and road and, closer to town, a river. The app she used to track truck-friendly stops showed a blank space here. She slid past without slowing more than traffic law required. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of someone standing under the canopy, a tall, narrow figure in a red flannel jacket, hands in pockets, a duffel bag at his feet. His face was in shadow. He didn't raise a hand, didn't move, just stood. Then the fog took the station back, smearing its lights into an indistinct orange halo, then nothing. She checked the GPS again. The blue line remained straight. Miles to destination ticked down normally. 5 minutes later, it appeared again. Same muted orange glow, a little ahead and to the right. Same cracked neon letters humming through the mist. Same arrow. The fog parted just enough again to present the small concrete island of pumps, the squat building with its bright, homey windows. The figure in the red flannel was still there, in precisely the same place, as if the truck had circled the world and returned to find him still waiting. The duffel strap looped in a dark curve at his boots. His head was bent slightly, like someone listening hard to distant traffic. Mara's spine prickled. The odometer insisted she had been driving a straight line. The GPS map showed no loops, no side roads, no opportunity to double back without noticing. Yet here was Fenway's again, occupying the same relative angle, the same piece of space her mind insisted she had already passed. Her fuel gauge needle sat comfortably above a quarter. She didn't need gas. She didn't need coffee. She didn't need anything except to be off this road. Another few miles slid under the truck. The fog thickened. The white painted stripes at the edge of her lane grew blurry, then sharp, then blurry again. The sense of motion began to feel abstract, like running on a treadmill in a locked room. The CB crackled. It wasn't the gentle background hiss she'd been ignoring, but a sudden, sharper pop, like static jumping a gap. The little green channel light glowed steadily. She hadn't touched the mic in an hour. Northbound on 12, you got ears on. The voice was male, older, roughened slightly by long nights and too much coffee, but quick and clear. The kind of voice that could call someone kid and make it sound like a compliment. Mara reached for the mic almost before thinking. Her thumb pressed the button. The stuffed wolf swung a little. Copy, she said. Westbound on 12, about 30 out of Stanton. Fog's a wall out here. The line hissed briefly, then cleared. You're on the connector, huh? The man sounded thoughtful. You hit Fenway's yet? Her gaze flicked to the right, just as the orange glow began to seep through the white again, exactly where she now expected it to be. Twice, she said carefully. Supposed to be out of business far as I knew. A low huff of something like a laugh came through. Been out of business longer than you've been driven, I'd wager. Flood took most of that stretch back in '92. They pulled the tanks and shut it up. Folks still see it sometimes when the river fog pushes this far. Most just keep on going. She watched the station coalesce. The squat shape of the building, the thin poles supporting the canopy, the pumps standing like patient sentries. The figure in red flannel shifted just a little this time, weight on one foot, then the other. He turned his head as the truck approached and this time lifted one hand in a small, tentative wave. Some don't, the voice added quietly. You take it slow on the river grade. Black ice likes the stripes through there. What's your mile? She asked, throat dry. Not yours, he said. I'm just passing it along. Watch for the sign when you drop into the hollow. You'll know which one I mean." The CB went back to a soft, breathing noise. This time when Fenway slid alongside, she found her foot light on the brake. The idea arrived not as a thought but as a kind of pressure, like a hand just between her shoulder blades, gentle but insistent. The loop of fog, the impossible repetition, the presence under the canopy lifting its hand after 2 passes of being utterly still. Forward and forward into the white, with the sense that the road ahead was folding in on itself. She signaled. The flasher clicked loudly in the quiet cab. The truck eased toward the gravel apron that led up to Fenway's small lot. The fog parted enough to allow room for the maneuver almost courteously. Tires crunched damp stone. The engine's note shifted as the grade tilted up, then leveled. She brought the truck to a stop along the far edge of the lot, giving wide berth to the old pumps. Up close, the station looked both more real and more impossible. The neon sign buzzed quietly, its tubes flickering slightly at the bends of the letters. The front windows revealed a narrow interior, rack shelves, a counter with a worn register, a coffee pot on a hot plate, a faded poster advertising a brand of soda that had changed its logo twice since. Under the canopy, the man in the red flannel turned to face her fully. He was in his mid-20s maybe, with stubble shadowing his jaw and a knit cap pulled low over his ears. His jacket was worn but clean. His jeans were damp around the cuffs. The duffel at his feet bore old trucking company logos, the thread bare in spots. He watched the truck settle, then lifted his hand again, more sure this time. Mara rolled down the passenger window a few inches. Cold, damp air eased in, along with the smell of wet asphalt and old oil. "You headed toward Stanton." His voice came hesitant but hopeful. She considered a dozen reasons to say no. Company policy, stranger danger, the way this entire scene hooked into something behind her ribs and tugged. But the fog was a living thing out there, and a figure alone at a shuttered station that shouldn't exist sat wrong with her in a way that overrode those smaller fears. "Yeah," she said. "Climb in. Seatbelt, doors stay locked. You make me regret it, I drop you at the next patrol car." A ghost of a grin touched his mouth, quick and grateful. Fair deal. He rounded the nose of the truck, boots scuffing on wet concrete. She heard the pop of the passenger door opening, then the subtle shift in the cab as he climbed up. The door thumped shut. The small space took on a new dimension, another heartbeat, another pattern of breath. He smelled faintly of river air and coffee. "Name, Levi," he said, clipping the seatbelt with a practiced motion that suggested riding in trucks wasn't new to him. "Appreciate the lift." "Mara," she replied. Her hands found the familiar shapes of wheel and gear, and she eased the truck back toward the ramp, up and out of Fenway's little halo of light and into the fog. For a stretch, they rode without speaking. The wipers ticked their rhythm. The whites of the fog and the dark of the road repeated in a steady pattern ahead. "You run this way often?" Levi asked at last, eyes on the windshield, watching the mist roll. "Couple times a month," she said. "Warehouse on the edge of town. First time I've seen your station." He huffed softly. "Yeah, Fenway's likes to keep to itself. Shows up when it needs to, my dad used to say." "You from around here?" she asked. "Was," he answered after a beat. "Grew up near the river, short-haul work mostly. Grains, lumber, knew every crack and patch in this stretch." He looked out into the fog as if he could see those cracks even now, especially the grade. As if summoned by the word, the road ahead dipped. A sign loomed out of the white, green and wet. "River grade, 6% next 2 miles. Use low gear." The fog seemed thicker in the hollow, drawn down by the water it hid. Mara's foot eased off the accelerator. The truck's weight shifted forward slightly, the trailer nudging with its quiet, patient mass. "Take it down another 10, Levi said softly. "There's a bend where it fools you near the bottom. Ice likes that outside lane." The GPS, impassive, suggested a posted speed of 50. She ignored it, letting the needle settle under 30. The engine brake murmured as she dropped a gear, the vibration under her feet changing tone. The fog outside became something more than weather. It pushed against the glass in slow, heavy movements. The beams from the headlights struck it and came back in diffused sheets, as if the air were full of flour. "Low beams," Levi added. "Highs just blind you in this soup." She clicked them down. The immediate glare softened. The short, clear slice of road in front of them became more distinct. The center line shone a dull, damp yellow. The guardrail appeared on her right as a dark, intermittent presence. "Guys come through here loaded and think the straightaway's safe," he went on, voice low, almost more to himself than to her. "They don't see the dip just before the bridge. Fog sits right in it. If there's trouble, you don't see it till you're wearing it." The grade steepened a fraction. The trailer's gentle press increased, a hand at the back of the cab. Ahead in the murk, a faint red glow appeared. Two tail lights, skewed at an odd angle, one higher than the other. As the truck crept closer, the beams picked out the shape of a pickup truck half crosswise in the lane, its nose down-angled toward the right shoulder, rear wheels still on the asphalt. A fresh sheen of blackness glistened around it, the telltale, smooth shine of new ice. Another vehicle had already stopped just beyond, hazard lights ticking an urgent, orange code into the fog. A figure in a reflective vest hovered near the bridge rail, phone pressed to an ear, body language tight and rattled. If Mara had been coming down at 50, even 40, the curve and the fog would have hidden the mess until it was far too late. Her hands moved without panic, years of training snapping into place. She braked gradually, pulling the truck into the empty left lane, giving the broken line of shoulder and skid marks a wide berth. The engine brake growled. The rig glided past at a controlled crawl. The man in the vest turned as they went by, expression drawn, eyes wide. For a moment, their gazes met through the milky air. In the cab, Levi lifted one hand in a small, almost reflexive echo of sympathy. Then they were through the worst of it, the grade easing up, the road straightening as it approached the unseen river crossing. The fog began to thin, almost reluctantly. Over the bridge itself, visibility stretched to 100 yards or more. The black surface of the water below was merely an idea, hidden under the white. "You did good," Levi said quietly. "Kept your weight where it belonged." Mara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding and allowed the speed to creep back toward reasonable. The lights of town began to bleed through the fog ahead, an orange smudge that grew steadily warmer and brighter. She turned to say something, to thank him, to ask again how long he'd been waiting at a station that no longer was, and found the passenger seat empty. The seatbelt lay smooth against the cushion, unlatched. There was no duffel bag on the floor, no scuffed boots. The space where someone had sat only moments before held the faint impression of recent warmth, the fabric still carrying the ghost of a body's presence, like a spot of sunlight that lingers after the cloud has moved on. On the dash near the base of the windshield, a paper coffee cup had appeared. It was white, the logo faded but legible. Fenway's Fuel and Food. Good coffee, hot meals, open late. Steam did not rise from it. When she reached out, the cardboard felt cool but not cold, as if it had been filled some time ago and set down carefully. The warehouse yard's floodlights rose up out of the thinning fog like a line of false dawns. The guard at the gate checked her in with sleepy efficiency, stamping her bill of lading without comment. As she handed over the paperwork, Mara's eyes slid to a faded photo tacked to the inside wall of the guard shack. A black and white shot of a young man in a flannel jacket leaning against the hood of a grain truck, the river faint behind him. The guard followed her gaze. "That's Levi Fenway," he said, with an offhand fondness that came from telling a story more than once. "Fenway's kid. Used to run this road every day till," he hesitated, respectful even with the distance of years. "Till that bad fog year. Folks say he still keeps an eye on the grade. Mara looked down at the cup in her hand. The logo's little coffee steam lines curled upwards in a cheerful, cartoonish way. "You ever stop at his family station?" she asked. The guard snorted softly. "Fenway. That old place washed out before they even built this warehouse. My granddad used to talk about their pies, though." He stamped the form again, a phantom echo. "You be careful out there on nights like this. Fog remembers." Later, when she climbed back into the empty cab for her return leg, the cup still sat on the dash, exactly where she'd left it. She put it carefully into the cup holder beside her own, as if two drivers were sharing the space. The fog had thinned by then, retreating into the fields and hollows, leaving only a light, ordinary mist hanging over the pavement. The road back toward the interstate was just a road again. On other nights in other weather, Mara took the connector without incident. The river grade was clear and bright, the bridge showing its steel arches, the farmland on either side stretching away under big, open skis. But whenever the forecast called for fog along that route, she'd top off at the last truck stop on the interstate and make sure the CB was on, even if no one was talking. And every so often, out of the corner of her eye, she'd see a faint orange glow where the map insisted there was nothing at all, and catch the echo of a quiet, young voice reminding her politely to keep her weight where it belonged.